Let me know once you're good.
Got it.
Good? Okay, man, we're off and running. So, Steve, I appreciate you making some time this morning.
Oh, this is way cool. You could ask my wife. I'm like your biggest fan. Love everything you're about, and yeah, this is cool. This is super cool.
Well, I appreciate it. Hopefully, I don't let you down once you realize I'm just a knucklehead like everybody else. Where are you coming from? Where do you live?
So I'm about halfway between Tahoe and Sacramento in California.
Okay, that doesn't sound like too bad of a place to live.
We love it. Yeah, it's kind of foothills. We're close enough to a big city if you need to get down there. My wife works in Sacramento at a hospital, and then I work generally in the area. So usually I'm not more than an hour and a half away from the house for my work, so it's all good.
Very cool, man. Well, leading up to this interview, you sent me a little bit of your backstory, and I was fascinated about you growing up racing dirt bikes.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I like you here and there. You'll put in there on your stories that you
Oh,
I'm on two wheels, so you get it. It's a thrill and it's wicked dangerous, but it's awesome.
I it sounds to me like you were and are infinitely more talented on two wheels than I am. I enjoyed riding for a bit, but I'm sure I did stupid things with the throttle and stupid things with everything else, or if I was just a magnet for bad luck, but I was just littered with littered with accidents and wrecks on two wheels.
Yeah, I mean it's a human slingshot basically, right? And I think what maybe isn't super obvious is the technique required to be good. You think it's just who's the biggest daredevil, and it's not really that. That you could be a hero for a little bit, but it's not going to last very long. So it's you have to be brave and take chances, but there's a ton of technique where and fitness. Like once your heart rate gets jacked and your arms are full of lactic acid, you can't hang on. I mean, it gets squirrely. So yeah.
So the dirt bikes that you grew up racing, you said it up until including like being like 15 years old, you had like an injury. We can chat about that for a second. But what kind of when dirt bikes could be, are you going long? Are you doing jumps or like what dirt bike racing were you doing?
So the format we got super into, we've done a bunch of them. It's called cross country. You would start on a motocross track. You line up with anywhere 10 to 20 people next to you, whoever's in your division. They shoot a shotgun. You start a bike, your bike, and everybody takes off. And you're on the motocross track. And right before the motocross track would end, you dart off into the woods or the desert, wherever you're at, and you'd complete anywhere from like 2 to a 20-mile loop. And it's basically a 2 hour AMRAP of laps. Like, how many laps can you get in 2 hours? So it's some of them are longer too. Some of them are 2.5, and yeah, it's a long time to be out there, but it was awesome.
What size bike were you riding for an event like that?
At the end, it was open class, so I rode a 250 two-stroke, but there was guys on 450 4 strokes and whatever you liked. For me, I'm a smaller guy. I'm 5'9". At the time when I was racing, I was like 135, 140 pounds, so I didn't need a lot of bike. It was plenty of bike for me, that 250. I tried a 450 and it was just a beast, and I wasn't comfortable, so I never stuck with it.
You're an inch taller than I am, and anytime I was on, I'd be fine on motorcycles, but like dirt bikes with their suspension and whatnot, there's no way I'm getting 2 feet on the ground with something like that. So can I assume you were always like doing the lean to one side?
For sure, and it's a one size doesn't fit all. Totally. I mean, my wife
Yeah.
has the same bike that I have. We did get hers a little bit lowered, but they don't have like a small, a
For who
medium.
is this, you said?
Oh, my wife, yeah, it's just
Okay.
got a bike and it's standard sizing. There's kids bikes and then there's adults bikes. There's not really a middle ground, so you're kind of along for the ride for whatever. The main thing you adjust is the suspension for your weight and your speed. So that's the main adjustment that you can do.
And what was your favorite brand bike?
I always was a Yamaha guy. I did get some support from KTM at the end, like the last few years I raced. So definitely those are awesome. But they're all good. But I to my in my heart, I'm a Yamaha guy. I just some
Okay.
love it.
And for anybody who's unfamiliar with bikes, how would you describe what's the difference between a two-stroke and a four-stroke, and why did you choose one over the other?
Okay, maybe like a lawnmower would be a four stroke and a chainsaw is a two stroke. So one's really aggressive, the two stroke, like the chainsaw's aggressive power, but it's lightweight, quick. And then the four strokes just super torquey, kind of like a diesel truck. You're just stuck to the ground, but they're heavier, they feel heavy. So that's kind of the difference there.
Interesting. And you're always kind of favor the two stroke, huh? Just grip it and rip it.
Yeah, I think looking back, I probably should have switched to a smaller CC, smaller engine four stroke, like a 250 or a 350 four stroke, just
Mm.
more controllable power. I have one that I just mostly play ride. I have done a race recently, but it's a 250 four stroke, and I'm just like, what was I doing on those two strokes? This thing is,
Oh, interesting.
it's kind of slow, but it's very usable, so it's nice.
I won't divulge any names to protect the innocent, but my wife trains in our garage. We've got a friend, her daughter attends a local high school with our son as well, and they chatted with us and they wanted to get her in shape for her sports. And my wife trains her 3 times a week in our garage, and she's a dirt bike racer.
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think she is on a Husqvarna, I want to say.
Okay. Yeah, I mean they're all awesome bikes, and it's always cool to hear the ladies that get into it. Like I think my wife started when she was uh 20, so late. Like you want to start when you're a kid and you're kind of fearless and you're like Gumby. So when you fall, you just bend and you're good to go. When you start as an adult, it's reality is there, and you're
Yeah, you understand velocity and force and things like that.
yeah, like my wife has no significant injuries. Like she's crashed and bruised herself up, but just the comparison between me and her is just so funny. Like, it's like who was better at it? Like she's not all beat up, so it's pretty cool.
I remember the first dirt bike I got. Um, my father like put it like in our barn. We lived in this like old, old colonial house in Massachusetts. It was built in like 1830, like an old house. And he hid it in the barn. It was this old, beat up. We didn't have a lot of money. I don't know where he found it. Just a beat the stuffing of it. Honda XR 75, like metal gas tank that was dented. Like everything's metal, the fenders are metal, like and that was my first exposure in the backyard that I got into trouble with that thing. And I remember we had like a big plot of land in the backyard doing laps and laps and laps, just tearing up the grass back there. And one day my mom, for whatever reason, just like got intrigued and she like wandered out back. And I don't know how old I was. I'm probably like 10, let's go ahead and say. And my mom wanders out back and she was like, "Hey, could I ride that?" She'd never been on a bike in her whole life. I'm 10. I don't know what's appropriate safety protocol. I'm like, "Sure." And so she may have put on the helmet, she may not. I don't know. Uh, but she got on the bike with like me giving her like, I don't know, 7 seconds of instructions to how to use the bike. She got it going, didn't stall it. And as soon as she get just in first gear, just, pinned out in first gear, didn't know how to shift. And she just became terrified, forgot everything about anything, didn't change any hand or foot position, and just probably at about 14 miles an hour, just ran directly into the stone wall in the side of the yard. And my initial reaction as a 10-year-old was, "Oh my goodness, my bike's probably wrecked." Nothing about my mother, her impact, but she lived to tell the tale. But I guess that leads into, if you spend enough time on a bike, you're going to wind up on planet Earth with the bike upside down. And so that happened to you in your early racing years. It resulted in injury. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the most notable injury, obviously, I was racing in the desert, and the desert races are crazy. They're super dusty. It's my least favorite terrain to race in because it's just super fast and it's kind of who's got the most guts, like the most plenty of skill involved, but it's super fast with just the open terrain. And kind of the last thing I remember is going into like a
Hmm.
wash where water would run with a guy, and it was kind of who's going to let off, and I don't think he did and I didn't. And then yeah, I think we kind of tomahawked each other, go flying
Oh,
in the air, and that was what did my hip in. So it took a little helicopter ride, and
oh, really?
yeah, they repaired it. then, so I was either 14 or 15. It's hard to remember exactly how old I was. They repaired it then, and they're like, "Hey, you're gonna need a new hip at some point. Go as long as you can." So I know you're familiar with that storyline
Well,
right there.
that's rough to hear at 15 or 14 years old, man. That's not supposed to, you're not supposed to get that news then.
No, it's 100% self-induced, and I'm sure I probably could have made it until I was 40 or 45 if I didn't keep going. Like I wanted to keep pursuing this. So as soon as I could get on the bike, I was right back on there.
Do you know, did you have to have surgery? Was it a fracture? Like what occurred to your hip at that time?
It damaged the socket, and so basically they did like
Mm.
a labrum repair in there, and the ultimate solution would have been a hip replacement, but this was, you know, I want to say roughly '08, '09, '07 maybe. They're much. I mean, they probably still wouldn't want to do it now, but they didn't want to do a hip replacement, even though that would have probably been the most comfortable solution for me. So they just did what they could, and they they put some screws in there that I had to deal with when I finally got the hip replacement that were 15 years old. So that was rough too, getting those out.
Oh, they took, okay, we can get to that. They took those out. Yeah. So you get the surgery. After the surgery, are you limited in what you can do or no? Or are you limited and you say, I don't care, I'm still gonna do whatever I want?
Uh, yeah, like range of motion just never was the same. Like 90 was good for like a depth.
Yeah.
And this time I'm not thinking about squatting. I'm just what's going to make me uh, best cardio and stamina for racing. So I don't know anything about strength and conditioning. So you're not in a full squat on a dirt bike. So I was like, this is
Sure. Did you have any mental block about getting back on the bike after that wreck?
for sure. But just you forget with time, pain. I think like my wife talks about having kids. You get from far enough away from having the kid, and you're like, yeah, I think I want to do that again. But right
Right.
after,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, so it's kind of like that where you forget after time. And I just really wanted to get as far as I could in the racing, so I was like, let's go.
And you said in your deal about your fitness journey that was it that injury that led to them giving you some painkillers and you said your parents split up about that time and you went through some rugged stuff. You know, what was happening then?
For sure. It was, I think my parents split up right before then, and people go through harder stuff than parents divorcing, but
Well, relative.
yeah, yeah, totally. It hit me super hard, and I didn't know how to cope with it. And so I was kind of dabbling with probably the wrong friends and whatever. And then the big injury with the pain meds came along. I was like, oh, yeah, that was,
Mhm.
it just, some people are wired that way. It's kind of like you don't know who's going to get hooked until it's too late, is kind of what I've learned over the years. There's no way to tell until it's too late. But anyway, I was one of those people who took to those. A lot of people like, ooh, I don't like that feeling. And I was not that. I was anything to kind of get me out of my reality, which my life was good, plenty awesome, but I was just wanting to find that escape. And yeah, I was a hot mess from 15 to 20. It got real crazy.
Wow. And what did that, and feel free to shut me down. I'm not, I don't, I certainly don't want to pry, but I'm like genuinely curious from not having experienced that myself. Like 15 to 20, man, like those are some formative years, right? And they're they're challenging times of learning about yourself and the world when your head's clear. I can assume going through those years in some sort of a distorted or foggy state is just going to make things a heck of a challenge. What when you were on those hills, like what was life like? Like did it just kind of take all the sharp edges off life? Did it make you care less about stuff? Like what was that experience like that I guess resonated with you that you stuck with those pills for those years?
Yeah, it kind of just you know, took me out of reality. I was functioning still. I think I worked at a diner at the time, and obviously finished high school. And after that, went to community college. And that's just, I was, quote, functioning, right? But it just was, Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like it was like an impulse where once I was in it, I didn't really know how to live any other way. It was just kind of like
Mm.
it's like eating food. It's like this is when you wake up, you eat your food, and then lunchtime. It's kind of just like this was part of my life, and it just progressively got worse. Where they really started regulating the pain pills, which is great, and
That was gonna be one of my questions.
yeah. So right, I think middle of my probably when I was 17, that was like the crackdown where they basically changed the whole system where it was really hard to get them. It went from really easy to get them to really hard to get them. So then you're trapped where you can't get any and you're withdrawing and it's just yeah, it was a tough situation. So then for a lot of people in my we turned to like the street version of the drugs. So it's way cheaper, it was accessible, which is
Mm.
really really scary. And it just from that point it just got worse fast, and I just became really untrustworthy, and was burning bridges left and right, and just kind of had you know this wake up call one day. I remember I was at my dad's house and I finally just buckled down. Like it just was like, okay, I need help. I cannot. I would try and I'd make it a little bit sober and I wouldn't make it. And I finally had that moment with my dad. I was like, I need help. And so him and
Was
my
he
mom.
aware of what you were doing, or did you open up to him?
I think everybody was not aware of the details, but there's no hiding it. It's like you
Gotcha.
somebody out and about and they're just not acting like a normal human being.
Right, right.
It was probably more obvious than I know it was more obvious than I thought. It was, and everybody did what they could to try to confront me and this and that. And I wasn't ready until I was ready. Like my mom and dad, whoever, friends, just because they wanted me to stop, that wasn't enough for me to stop. I had to be ready. So finally, I got unhappy enough, and I just had this weird feeling of, the 8-year-old version of me would be so disappointed
Hmm.
in who I am, like this is not a life to be proud of. And so, yeah, from that day, him and my mom teamed up and they called a place, and I went and stayed at like a rehab center for 3 or 4 months. And it is sound weird, but after the first week or two, everything was pretty easy for me because I was so done living that way. And they did the full AA, NA like steps and meetings. And I mean, that was the most beneficial thing going through those steps because you basically go through all the stuff you did wrong and you go like I took some money out of the diner cash register, right? Like just for example, and like part of the steps is you have to go fix that stuff. So I went in there
Mm.
with the money, the amount that I took and was like, hey, like I have to, this is part of my recovery. Like, here's the money. What else can I do to fix this? And you just go down the list and you do that with every person.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really, really powerful. But I think people who don't succeed in their sobriety, like they don't do the full house cleaning. Like you got to go deal with
I'm
all.
sure it's uncomfortable.
It's super uncomfortable, and if you don't do it, that stuff's in the back of your head. Like you didn't deal with it deep down, and it would just eat away at you. And you need that. I'm not saying like I'm super like always content, but if I didn't deal with it, I would not be content. It would be back there eating at me. So it was the most powerful, life changing thing, and it's been pretty easy for me to continue just because life is so much better, and I'm just so thankful for it. So I was just 12 years sober in September, which is really crazy.
Yeah, man. Congrats on 12 years. That's crazy. Yeah. In in my experience, which is vastly different than yours, I always find that I'm pleasantly surprised by how if somebody did something wrong for whatever reason, and then that person actually takes ownership of it and has that difficult, uncomfortable conversation with the other party, like face to face, which sadly nobody does in like 2025, that almost, I shouldn't say regardless, but almost regardless of how large the grievance was, the mere fact that it's happening, the other parties are very willing to like forgive and redeem and move forward and accept it? Was that when you had to go back and face all these people? I assume there was some fear, but did you find most of it actually went quite well?
It went so good. It was a lot of people like, no one's ever done this before. This is so like so happy for you. This is like you're this is the biggest sign that you're going to make it. The only one that was kind of weird was my best friend was home from the Marines and I swiped some cash out of his wallet. That's the kind of person that I was in my addiction. It's crazy to think about it. And so he had gone back and then he was on leave again and I saw him. I was like, perfect, I gotta right this wrong. So here's this whatever amount of money. Like, hey, I took this from you. He's like, no, you didn't. I would have known. And it's like, so I had to convince him that it went good, but that was the weirdest experience. Was just like, no, I promise, like I did this, and somehow you didn't know. Anyway, everybody else was super awesome. I actually ran in a grocery store and grabbed like a 30 pack of beer and ran out, and they chased me out, and I barely made it in the truck and out the parking lot.
Using your fitness, man.
Well, yeah, stupid. And anyway, I went back in there, and that was super cool. It's like, just to do that, and the owner was talking to me. He's like, "This is no one's ever done this," and just fixing all is the most powerful thing ever, is dealing with that. Super uncomfortable, obviously, but man, like the relief you get, and you're clean slate basically if you do it right. Which is, if anybody wants to know the secret to success in sobriety, it's that right there. Is you got to go through everything you did, and it's even the small stuff like, uh, just dealing with being absent from people's lives, or all
Mm.
the, just go through it all. Just clean it up.
Man, do you have kids?
I have a 7-month-old daughter and a almost 3-year-old daughter.
Oh, you're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Girl dads unite. Uh,
Yep.
you know, when I hear your stories, and I've got every family has their issues. I think anybody says they don't is lying. And so while I haven't personally experienced some of the addiction stuff that you're talking about with like myself being an addict, there are most certainly people in my bloodline very close to me that have had stuff going on. And man, I try to think like if my child was going through this, I could put myself in the position of your father or mother, right? Like you said, they probably you're not fooling anybody. Somebody knows something's not right. And then what you said, I've heard so many times that I have to think it's the actual truth, which is nothing was going to change until you were ready, until for whatever reason you decided now is the time. I've had enough. I've hit rock bottom, whatever. Like your parents can give you the greatest speech ever, your friends the greatest speech ever, and blah, blah, blah. But man, I believe that. But I can't imagine if that was happening to my son or daughter. um, I just have to know, like, I have to let my child like almost crash, hit rock bottom, because that's what's actually going to do it. But at the same time, you don't want your child to crash, so you're going to want to protect them, which probably actually just like delays the process of them hitting that wall so they can change. Like, I can't imagine the circular hell that must be to try to figure out. And now you as a parent, I mean, has all that kind of wrapped into your mind every now and then?
Yes, and I just want to say, like, my mom and dad trying, and anybody, my brother, friends, family, whatever, them trying and it not working, it was planted in my brain that I had support. So even if they tried
Mm,
to do whatever they tried to do to help me and I wasn't ready, like that was in my head, that it was in there. So if someone's out there and they're trying to help the loved one, tell them that you're there to help them, because it's going to plant the seed in their brain. And then when the day comes, it's not, I'm alone and now I got to
mm.
figure it out. Like, I've been that when I was ready, I knew that my family was wanting to help me for years and I just wasn't ready. So, uh, yeah,
That's cool.
it is cool to just remember that, like, that mattered, even though it maybe wasn't on the timeline they wanted me to get my stuff together. Them being there and telling me they were there really did make a difference, because when I was ready, I knew that I had the support. So it's that My wife and I are always trying to figure out how to have uncomfortable conversations with people that would benefit them when it's unsolicited, right? Like I need to tell somebody something and it's because I love them and I want to help them, but they didn't ask. I think it's
Hmm.
weird, right. It's like, well, I should just wait till and it's like maybe they're never gonna ask. And then am I gonna regret it if I don't ever just say it? So that's it's something that we worked on in our marriage where I don't she said she called me out a day ago on something and it was like something I didn't want to hear, but she was right. So
Yeah.
we have this thing where we can tell each other this things and we don't like it, but it's like it's gotta we're super proud of that. We've established that we can tell each other things we don't want to hear and it's for each other's benefit. It's not an attack. So yeah, that's really cool.
Man, if you can get to that place with yourself, with other people, that's like superpower status, like no joke. I mean, because I mean, you nailed it. You're right. I mean, people are a puzzle. They're so challenging. Like most people know what should be said or, or even what they need to hear, but then they hear they don't really want to hear it, so they get defensive. And you can break that cycle of like, didn't want to hear that. Let me pump the brakes before I get defensive and think for a second, is there some validity to what was said? Dang it. Yes, there is. Like that's a really great place to get to. And if you allow yourself to get to that, your ability to improve as a person will like skyrocket.
And it's still super hard. Like she
Oh,
said what I was already thinking, and it's still my first thing was like, no, like, but it's crazy how it's still we're in an agreement, and I still struggle with it. So yeah, I don't. You always say you deliver messages for a living, and it's so I was like, how do you bridge that gap where you have somebody you care and you love about, and you need to tell them something because it would help, it would help them, and I want people to know that they can do that with me too. Like just tell me what you need to tell me because I want to be better. So I guess yeah, how do you go about that when you're have somebody you need to tell? Do you just do it or do you kind of yeah?
generally, yes. Generally, yes. Like and of course, you don't want it to fracture the relationship, but I think you have to think that it may fracture a relationship, but if it does, hopefully it's temporary, and hopefully that fracture is um, less severe than if you had left the issue unaddressed. Do you know what I mean? Because an issue unaddressed, if it's a legitimate issue, well, that's like festering and building resentment. Like that's going to explode into some problem down the road later, no matter what. And I certainly don't always communicate properly. You can just ask my wife for confirmation about that. But I do really believe that like you can say almost anything to anyone. It really is how you say it, and ideally, if you know the person well enough, you might have it still might not go great, but you might have some insight as to because person A might receive a message in a different way than person B. Some people you can just shoot them straight and they'll be ferocious for about 24 hours and they'll get over it. Some people you need to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit, but still get the message across. Like each one's a little bit different, but at the same time, I do think things have to get said. And if it is actually the truth, which I think is the most important thing, is it actually the truth? And is it actually coming from a place of that you love and care about this person, truly want the best for them? Because if you get those two things covered, it's the truth and it's coming from the right place. And if that person has, some sort of cognitive ability and is somewhat sane and rational, whether they're ferociously mad for 6 minutes or 6 months, they're eventually gonna have to be like, dang it, that that was correct and what I needed to hear, and that person said it because they cared, and you hope that they circle back or whatever it is. So yeah, I generally do that, and I've been on the receiving end of it as well, and I try to tell my kids every now and then they're like, you'll be a different species of human being if you can develop the ability to have difficult conversations on both the giving end and the receiving end. Like if you can do that, I'm not saying that your life's going to be easy, but it will be better because you'll be in this kind of constant state of advancement, advancement, advancement. Because no one's perfect, right? And if you don't allow yourself to hear where you need to improve and you just shut your doors, well, you're going to be stagnant. And nobody wants to be stagnant. So if you really want to advance as a human being in your career, with your emotions, with your relationships, like you've got to be willing to hear some stuff that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. But easier said than done for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's the skill that I'm not good at, but I want to get better at because it's coming from a place of care and you love somebody, so it's coming from the right place. I think I can be proud of it, even if it's really uncomfortable.
100%. Well, there's one more thing I want to talk about with your addiction stuff, and then guess we'll maybe touch on some other like fitness stuff. But and maybe I'm sure everyone's journey is different, but I found it fascinating that you said, relatively speaking, you're finding sobriety relatively easy. Like that's amazing. When you speak with other people that are going through what you're going through, is that sentiment common or uncommon? Because from my uninitiated perspective, it sounds uncommon. I would just assume sobriety is really hard.
I think it's pretty uncommon. For whatever reason, it just was so obvious to me how much better life got basically right away when I finally asked for help. That and like everything just kept improving. I just kept trying hard at everything, and obviously, like with recovery, a big thing on most of the programs is faith. So
Mm,
that has definitely been a huge part is faith aspect. But I think just I'm just genuinely grateful for how much better it is, and it's like whatever I said earlier, where the 8-year-old version would be disappointed in who I was when I was 19. I think when I turned 21 or 22, like 1 or 2 years sober, that little kid would be like, yeah, awesome, that's better. So I think just that was easy. I will say, so I busted my wrist really bad in 2019, so 5 years
mm.
ago. And like it was to the point where I needed the pain meds. It was a really bad wrist.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I had to face that. Before that, I had fractured my elbow and just gutted it out, no pain meds. And then I like hurt my spleen and no pain meds. But this one was like, okay, I actually broke my collarbone and my wrist, and it was pain med requiring. So yeah, I think it was scary to start taking them, and then coming back off of them, you feel that old feeling of running out of the substance. It's like, whoa, this stuff it's scary. It's amazing medicine for relieving pain, but for certain people it's scary. So coming off there was it was really weird. Both times with my wrist, and then getting the new hip almost.
You were successful. I mean, you
Yeah.
you came off.
Yeah, and I really was diligent. Like, I'm gonna take them as it says on the bottle, no more. And it's this point you've made many times in your podcast, this drone of scrutiny. And then you could call it that. You could like call it God. You call it whatever. Like someone's watching. Your
Mm-hmm.
instance is watching you. So it's like there's no hiding from yourself. So it's like I had to be accountable, and that was a tough challenge, but it was like cool. Okay, I made it through, came off of them. It wasn't that pleasant being on the pain pills for a month and then coming off. Like you just a weird bodily change, and you go from being super comfortable to not. But yeah, like got through that, and yeah, I think the weirdest part about being sober is like, let's say, for example, like my father-in-law and brother-in-law are like, hey, they're super cool about my sobriety and stuff. But early on, like, hey, come have a beer around the campfire with the boys, and it's like, oh, or somebody will find out like, you got 10 years sober, like you're good, you
Mm,
know you can do it, and it's like maybe, but it's just
maybe.
yeah, that understanding of like it's just not worth it. It's so good now that, and life's not all sunshine and rainbows, but it is so much better that it's not worth it. And so, not that people need to understand, but little stuff like come have a beer with the boys, and it's like that little stuff's, kind of weird to navigate, but people are super respectful. The weirdest it's ever gotten is someone like, oh, come on, and they just kind of deal with that. It's no big deal.
Right.
Like, yeah.
I think some people just don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
'cause I had a similar buddy who um, should not drink. Somebody I was in the military with should not drink, and he drank for a long time. He was a different human being, and now he doesn't drink, and great. He's a much better human being. I think we all agree with that. And just somebody who maybe has never dealt with addiction in a sense of that. Out this is years ago. We're out somewhere and they're like, hey, have a drink. It's like, oh, so and so is, whatever he labeled himself. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I shouldn't do it. And they just, probably not out of malice, but just out of ignorance, just didn't know. It's like, well, we're not going to get drunk tonight. Like, just have one with me. And they didn't understand, well, like that, like, was off the table. Like, hey, we're not going to stay here all night. We're just going to have one, talk for a bit and get out of here. And he's like, I can't do that. And I think some people just don't get it.
Nope. If they could see him at his worst or me at my worst, they would not do that. And my wife sees the way I approach things in life, where it's pretty much like a light switch. I'm either all about it or I'm not about it. So she's like, no way. Like, if I see you with a beer in your hand, I'm probably kicking you in the head. Like, she's so, yeah, yeah, I guess people just haven't seen the worst. So, yeah, they don't get it, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, you said in your thing that you had that wrist break, and at that point in time, you had some other stuff going on in your life where you're newly married and starting. Did you start your career as an equipment operator then?
So I was an apprentice up until 2018, and then the next year I had like graduated the apprenticeship, and that's right when I broke my wrist, and it's this tiny little bone in your wrist that takes forever to heal. It's just known for that. So
Mm.
I was off for like 6 months, and I'm kind of the main guy on the crew. So it's got to give the company truck back, and they got to get a guy to fill in, and it just is super
Right.
weird. And so I just felt super fragile. Like, physically, I was super thin. I felt like I was in good shape for, bikes and stuff. But and then we lived in like this little granny flat above a garage, and I was like, man, I just kind of feel fragile generally. We don't have a house. We're not married. Like, physically, I could, my shoulders popping out all the time. It's like
Mm.
changed basically everything. So yeah, I just really buckled down once I got back to work, and we got married, and my wife started her career as an X-ray tech, and yeah, we got into a house, and then I was like, I gotta pack on some pounds. So I went from like 135, 140 pounds. I got all the way up to like 170, 175. Maybe not the cleanest bulk session ever. I remember at one point I was talking to a guy. He was like a huge power lifter guy I just randomly met, and he's like, you gotta eat like 12 waffles a day. Just some terrible advice.
You're
But
like, do I really?
yeah, yeah, I was like, okay. So anyway, that just slowly evolved, and yeah, I just bought little equipment for the house. Like, I had a bar and like a funny little pull-up bar, and would work out here and there. Like, I think we did the Wendlers uh,
Mm-hmm.
thing that we learned at the original CrossFit gym we went to, and it was just kind of all over the place. And uh, that was fine. It was good. And I remember when I finally was to the point where I was like, okay, I need to get my hip fixed. And they're like, okay, it's a 10-month wait, and you need to get as strong as you possibly can. And I was like, okay, 10 months wait for the surgery. Like, what am I going to do? And I had been always like a observer of CrossFit, like watching since like 2017. I just watched, like, I had done some workouts,
Okay.
always watched it, and I knew it was like the thing, the best fitness method, but I just kind of watched from afar, like never followed a program, never. I was always active, and I would do one here and there workout, whatever. But it's like, okay, I'm gonna follow a program, and I had been listening to Very Not Random, which uh, was just your pragmatic approach to doing the stuff you don't want to do, and that was me. Like, I would always skip the stuff I didn't want to do. And so January 2022, I think I did my free trial. So uh, and then, a few months into that, I remember you mentioning your hip was kind of funny. Like, I'm like,
Mm.
sure, if he's going to need a hip. And then right after I got mine done, you're like, I'm getting my hip replaced. Like, how weird is this?
Oh yeah.
It's so, like, of all there's thousands of programs out there, and I picked the one where the head guy is getting the hip replaced too. I was like, this is so weird. Like, God is just funny like that, I swear.
So you got your hip replaced 7 months into Linchpin.
Yes, yes, yep.
And so when was it done? What month or what year?
That was August 23. So
Okay.
almost
Okay.
2 years ago. And I basically was so limited, like couldn't do toes to bar because of range of motion, barely squat to 90. Like you talked about putting on your shoe was just a pain. Like I dread putting on shoes. Like it's the weird.
100%.
Yeah. So yeah, finally I was like, I just want to be able to do a real squat. I want to be able to do, and it's gone way past that. Like yeah, not crazy numbers. I'm not a super strong guy, but I did like a 225 back squat, 290.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, yeah, 290 deadlift, and then I did Jerry, which just completing Jerry with a hip replacement is crazy. I did Murph without a vest, but I did Murph. So just stuff like that is super cool. Like I did the 8 by 200 meter running sprints the other day, and was like,
Yep.
this is crazy that I can do all this stuff. Because before, I remember we had like a little 100-meter loop at our house, and before I got my surgery, I was like, I'm just gonna run this workout, and I made it one lap and I could not. I was like, this is too painful
Mm,
with the hip done. It's not perfect. I mean, maybe yours is similar, but yeah, it's so much better. I'm so glad it's.
100%. Yes. It's not perfect, but man, it's so much better than what I've been living with for decades. Like it's so much better. When put those two comparisons, I can't complain at all.
Yeah, it's good.
I can still definitely tell my good side and my bad side. Like it is what it is. Whether I'm coming up out of the bottom of a squat and I can tell I'm leaning and I'm like, ah, dang it, or if we're doing the like kickstand squats and I will force myself to use like the same load kettlebell, but it's definitely harder on one side. I'm using more assist from the other foot, but hey, that's all the process, man. You just play the hand that you're dealt.
Yeah, yeah. So today's the 10K row, and I've always found a reason to not. I've done a few 5Ks, and they're absolutely gross. But I've always found a way to skip the 10. I'm gonna go on a mountain bike ride today, whatever,
Hmm.
really intense dirt bike ride, and I think I got to do the 10K row today. There's no more
Oh,
from that thing. Dang it. Ugh.
no, I'm not looking forward to it at all. Like at all. But I'll put on some sort of podcast or something and just get it done and check it off the block. You're right, because you're just gonna keep getting putting bricks in the wall, right? You don't have to like all the darn bricks. You just gotta put them in there.
Yeah, it's true, and it's crazy the fitness that you can get from Linchpin. Like I just did the workout of the day. I never do the accessories. It's honestly probably a little bit too much volume for me to do the
Mhm.
accessories. So just the workout of the day, scaled most of the time, wild card sometimes. Every once in a while, body weight stuff I do RX. But I did one of those same dirt bike races a few months ago, and I got third in the pro class. It was like, come
That's
on.
awesome. Congratulations, man.
Yeah, it was cool. Like this. I just work out in my garage before work, and I rode like once every couple weeks leading up to the race, and was good to go. So Linchpin definitely gets you fit enough for the real world. That's for sure.
Man, well, I'll tell you what, your story is fascinating. Again, it's just so many things I can relate to from motorcycle wrecks to hip stuff. But you've been through a lot of stuff from that to, other aspects of your life that we talked about. I mean, you're a parent, the whole nine yards, you got stuff going on. Any lessons learned or, advice or recommendations you'd leave somebody listening with that maybe the health or fitness has fallen off a bit, they got a lot on their plate, everything seems overwhelming. Like, what would you recommend?
I mean, for me, faith is number one, and then the next thing would just be like you got to take personal responsibility. Like I benefit the most when and I don't get it right. Like I mess it up every day, but like really, what is my part in whatever problem I'm having? Like I'm not the victim of anything. There's victims out there, but I feel like it's a rare occurrence. Most of the time, people are where they are because of choices they make. Like all the problems that I had are all self-induced, maybe besides my parents splitting up, but everything else is like those are choices I made, and
Hmm.
taking that personal responsibility and looking inward and being like, it's me. Like I got to clean up my side of the street, and that is, I think if I mean honestly, if I could get better at that, I'd be doing even better. Like nobody could overdo personal responsibility. Just lean into it. What is my part in this problem? Or yeah, that, I mean, that to me is the number one thing.
I think that's perfect. Well, Steve, man, I appreciate you, brother. Appreciate your openness, your honesty, your authenticity, and I say it all the time, and I mean it. It's folks like you that make Linchpin what it is. So thank you for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks, Paz. Great talking to you.
All right, man. Have a good day.
You too.